everybody, and welcome to our monthly Impact series. I'm so excited to be co-hosting this, as always, with my lovely partner in crime, Sneha, and to have Pete join us. My name is Jacquie. For those of you who don't know me, I am here at Observe.AI, leading all of our solution product marketing. And with me is Sneha. Sneha, do you want to give yourself a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. Hey everyone, I'm Sneha. I lead the business value consulting and analytics department here at Observe. I work with customers day in, day out on, financial modeling during the pre-sales process and the actual value realization on the post-sale side. So I'm really excited for this conversation with you, Peter. I know there's a lot that we see, Jacquie and I see in our value consulting work. Really excited to unpack a lot of that with the audience today.
Super
Fantastic.
excited. And yes, we have Peter, who is the CMO-in-Residence at Scale Ventures. And Peter, you're going to be better at introducing yourself than I ever could. So I'll hand the mic over to you.
Yeah, no, sure. Thank you for inviting me for this. I love these sessions, and I'm super excited about the topic today. At Scale, I help SaaS startups translate like super complex go-to-market problems into very clear kind of go-to-market strategy. And I do that by looking at product, their market, and any execution gaps. And I try to figure out, is this operational? Is it about market selection, and so forth. Before Scale, I was the global director for go-to-market strategy at Google for Google Workspace, a platform with 3 billion users. And before that, I was a founder 2 times at different technology companies. One was more of a B2B and the other was more of a B2C. And I spent a long stint at VMware, early days. I was the first product marketing person at VMware, first and only, actually. And I was there 10 years while we grew from 50 million to 6 billion a year in revenue. I serve now as the CMO-in-Residence at Scale, and I work across our portfolio, just trying to help all of our companies get across these very critical GTM inflection points.
Wow, you have lived quite the life, and we're so lucky to have you for this hot topic today. So thanks so much for joining us.
Of course.
All right, so quick housekeeping items, and then I promise we'll get into the nitty-gritty and what you're all here for. This session will be recorded. It will be sent to everybody here, as well as any follow-up resources after the webinar. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a Q&A section. Please feel free to drop your Q&A in there at any time. Sneha and I will be monitoring that, and we will try our best to get through as many questions as we can. But Sneha and I also came well prepared with some questions too, so hopefully we'll answer some of the ones that are in your mind. All right, so with that, let's dive right in. First, I would like to kind of start with, how do we start to understand what we're really paying for in this AI world? And so, Peter, you've advised dozens of companies on the overall pricing strategy. When you flip the lens, what do you think buyers are still getting wrong when they're evaluating AI solution pricing?
Thanks for that. So I think that the fundamental issue is the same, whether you're buying or even when you're creating a new AI first or AI feature set, right? And this mistake is when you're looking at AI in terms of the way we used to look at, right? The classical way and traditional SaaS products were built and offered and bought, right? And so this entire mindset was about paying access for software. And most often with SaaS, it was about, seats and predictable usage tiers and everything else. The difference is that when you buy AI, you're not buying tools for your users to deliver a better result. You're buying software that can deliver a result. And the failure to make sort of this mental shift can create what we call like bill shock or sticker shock months later because of a misunderstanding of the cost drivers. And that's because with AI, there's very real costs associated with all use of AI. And so when we get stuck in this mindset, it leads to a much bigger issue. And that's about, addressing and defining the root causes. And I've seen companies, talk about wanting to increase efficiency, but that's just a symptom, right? That's not the diagnosis. And I think the perspective that comes from the classical SaaS era, where these companies were buying the tools, isn't enough to get to the root cause, right? And so I think the antidote is that buyers need to be very specific about exactly how value is created when the root problem is solved. I like to use a jobs to be done framework for this. So for example, instead of saying, we need to be more efficient and save time, we address the core issue, right? We need to decrease our product Q&A cycle by 25% so we can ship 3x more product updates per quarter to outpace the competition, right? Now, I know that's kind of like a best case scenario to have it so prescriptive, but that's what we're shooting for, right? That helps us narrow down what are we actually trying to solve, and it makes the rest of it a lot easier. I know that was a little long, but hopefully that was okay. It's kind of like the root of everything I think we're going to talk about. So
yeah, I think it was perfect. And I love the way you position it. Sneha and I talk about this with clients all the time, right? It's, we need to know what we're building for in order to know what we're solving for. And so starting that conversation early and often being the key, right? Especially in this AI world, things may shift on a regular basis. And so always doing that pulse check of how are we defining success and how are we measuring that ROI time and time again. I think that that's really powerful.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a great point, right? A lot of organizations, they are striving towards efficiency. And, when you ask them, okay, what's the problem that you're trying to solve for? The answer is we want to improve our efficiency. And what you said is really key, that efficiency is just a symptom. It is not the diagnosis. The diagnosis is much bigger. One thing that we've seen a lot when we're trying to understand what it is that you're really paying for, or what's the value, what's the result that you're paying for. I think a lot of buying committees or organizations, they can't even agree on what the problem is to what the problem costs, right? And so what do you think happens when internal buying committees can't agree on what the problem even costs?
Well, I think, again, this, for my, I've spent about 30 years in enterprise software. And I mean, this is a classical issue. And it's also something that rears its head in a more powerful way around AI, I think, because the stakes are a little bit higher. And so what I've kind of developed like 3 tests, right? I think these 3 things or filters need to be true in order for things to really move quickly. And that is, number 1, the problem that wants to be addressed, right? That job to be done, it needs to be important. It needs to be somehow like directly related. You have to be able to show a direct connection between what problem you're trying to solve and a top 1 or 2, maybe 3 priority at a company, right? At the C-level, board level. That's first. Second, it needs to be urgent, right? This means we have to solve it in like low single-digit months or quarters, right? This isn't like over 5 years we want to do something. And then lastly, and this, again, this goes right back to the first question, it needs to be valuable, right? It needs to be shown that when we solve it, it impacts a well-known value driver, right? Companies know how they create value. And so you have to show a connection to that. And like, I like to say, like, this is an and, it's not an or. Like, all 3 of these need to be in place. Otherwise, it's going to get stalled.
Yeah. Okay, that's spot on. And I think one of the things that we do see a lot of leaders that they should be focusing on is protecting the integrity of the outcome, right? Buyers, they usually need help projecting AI costs. And to my point previously, a lot of organizations or buying committees don't even know where to begin. They don't even know what the problem costs. And it is a real problem, right? You don't have benchmarks, you don't have predictability because it's not something that you've measured in the past. And so all of a sudden, if you're now put in the hot seat of, okay, I need to justify or identify what the problem costs. If you don't have benchmarks, you don't have any predictability, no past mechanisms of doing it, where do you start? I think that's where AI almost creates this pricing paradox, right? You the more you use it, the more value you get, but the more cost you incur with the value that you're unlocking. And so I'm curious to understand what's your thought process, what's your suggestion or advice on how do buyers price, structured pricing, right, with AI to avoid killing innovation. And that's key because you have innovation teams which want to experiment. And with experiment, it's going to be multiple iterations. You are going to incur cost with experimentation. Unless you fail, you won't know where you're going to succeed. But at the same time, you have these procurement teams who need a forecastable spend, a budget, that they can put into their fiscal year projections. So how do you draw that balance between what the procurement team needs from predictability versus not killing the innovation team from experimenting and incurring more cost?
Yeah, I think this is it, right? Like this is what all enterprise buyers are faced with now. And I think what we should do is let's go back to the kind of second part of the question you asked before, because it's not just about stalling. It's likely the problem is getting stalled because of the failure to really understand what's the business value, right? So the antidote, right, to move things quickly and to solve the problem you're asking now is to keep pushing the conversation to get to specific measurable KPIs and value drivers, right? So we have to frame the problem in a way that we're pushing all of the conversation towards diagnosis so that we can get to, hey, okay, what are the processes we want to improve? What are the KPIs that guide those processes? What do we think we need to do to improve those KPIs to get us where we want to be, right? That's the first way of framing the value. You have to have that done before you can even have the conversation about, hey, how are we going to, put guardrails or whatever around how we buy, because you have to know what value you're generating. Okay, so this is how I think you should navigate it, right? Like you said, you've got to handle this paradox or these two sides of the coin, which is around how do you, help your teams innovate and experiment, but also get the CFO, the finance team, those predictable costs. So I think number one, you need to start with at least three kind of, I would say like non-negotiables, but everything in life is negotiable. But here's where I would try to at least create a stand so that you can do the best for both you and the vendor, by the way. And so I think the right way to go after this is understand that it's very likely you're going to be looking at a pricing strategy that has some sort of base plus some sort of variable, right? Whether it's usage-based or even the number of seats or even outcomes in some case, right? But the key is focus on these guardrails. So number one, you've got to have spending limits. What are those hard monthly or quarterly limits that are going to help you encapsulate all that variable spend, right? You won't be able to go over that without some formal review or some executive authority. Number two, now that you've got the limits in place, you want alerts, usage alerts. These are often automated notifications, right? So when you hit, let's say 70% of your usage, and then again at 90% of what your cap is, you get alerted. This way, there's no surprises. And then finally, what I'm seeing in the market is the beginning of a proliferation of credits to be used as a way to buy those credits up front that allows you to put that budget in place. So you buy a block of credits up front. And when you're running low, you can then top up or renew some of those credits. But it creates this situation where you've got to make a decision to do more. And I think that these three things, right, whether they're offered sort of out of the box from your vendor or it's something you can come to terms with in the negotiation, either way, it is the core way to help yourself maintain that sandbox and protect from runaway costs.
That's actually pretty cool. I do have a follow-up on the credit piece. I would like to understand a little bit more on how the credit structure works. Is this credit part of the fixed or the variable spend, or is this additional to what you're already encapsulating in your variable spend?
So predominantly, I've seen credits used for the initial part of the spend, right? So you pay some sort of platform fee which again is somewhat akin to like an access fee, right? And then the credits give you the usage buckets for you to do the work with the AI software.
Okay.
There are cases where I've seen companies also offer the credits as an add-on or as an expansion. And so I think we're in a time where there's lots of experimentation on this front. So we'll see more. And just if you're wondering, a credit, this is usually designed by the vendor, and they take a look at how their product is used, where the value is created, and they look for ways to kind of bundle up activities or actions or usage into what they call credits. Very often, a credit equates to a single dollar, but it's an easier way to think about using these credits when you're using them to do a certain activity on a platform. A great example is how Clay has implemented credits. I'll use that one example I'm super familiar with. When you're in their interface, as you're starting to pick different kinds of things you want to, or records you want to enrich, it'll tell you, hey, this will be around X number of credits, and here's how many you have in your plan. That way you kind of know what you're working with at all times.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I love that. Just having that visibility that this is what you're working with. It does two things, right? One, it's not curbing your innovation spend, like you're mindful of it. But at the same time, it limits your variable spend. So, I really like that way of positioning it.
What I like about that the most is, there's so many different directions you can go based on what your current need is. And I think that that's the most exciting, but maybe also the most overwhelming part of an AI vendor. And so to not be locked into one direction, but actually have this menu every single day around, gosh, can I use them in this way versus just this way? I think it really helps me kind of shift my mindset, right? Of like, they are now a partner in this journey of mine versus I am in this box and I just need to use it in this one way.
Yep, very well said.
Love that. Okay, next we're gonna go into kind of a fun thing of red flag versus green lights. Um,
Okay.
well, we've all heard the term, right? FOMO. There's so much FOMO around the AI, like I need to get in. And so I think this is gonna be fun. Let's talk about what the red flag is and maybe like how to reposition it. So first, falling for the AI hype over substance, right? We get distracted by the really cool demo, the shiny object of, oh my goodness, what could that do for me, right? Instead of focusing on whether or not the AI is going to genuinely solve the critical business problem, right? You mentioned that earlier. So the vendor shows me this really cool demo. My brain's going crazy. I'm like, oh my goodness, look at all these magical outcomes. The ideas are just like going off, but it's always with their perfect data and the perfect problem that they've defined, right? But that's not life. Life is messy. So in this case, right, we're talking about how you get out of almost like a zombie POC, and really make sure that you are evaluating in the most effective way possible. How would you reframe the situation to make sure somebody is truly walking away with AI that will work?
Absolutely. I think, number one, all vendors are they have a demo, right, that they've set up, and it's there to showcase all of the best capabilities, the best attributes, features of their product in the best light. And that's great because you do want to see what those edges of possible are. However, like you said, Jacquie, it's like we've got to make this practical. And so my recommendation is you don't want to surprise a vendor with this about what I'm about to say, right? But work with your vendor. Like you said, like vendors and customers need to be in a partnership. And so partnerships are about trust, and trust is about being open and transparent. And so what I like to do is call the vendor and say, hey, here, like let's say, for example, you're looking at some AI technology that'll help review recorded calls like this one and help figure out how to improve sales, right? We all know about these kinds of technologies. So what you might do is call the vendor and say, hey, here's actual customer calls we've had that we've struggled with. And here's a transcript. Show me how your product would have coached the agent in real time, right? Let's say that that's actually how the value is created. And maybe that's their secret sauce, is that it's happening all real time, right? You see what we've done there? We've taken kind of what the promise is, and we've provided a bounded, a scoped use case for the vendor to help us, because it's going to help us understand exactly how it'll be in our environment. Another case, let's go back to the enrichment idea. We're all, striving for sales and top of funnel. Hey, here are 100 lines from our CRM that need to be cleaned and enriched. Show us how your product does it, right? This show, don't tell is so important. So bottom line, just create the situation that gives the vendor the opportunity to prove they can deliver those results.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that.
Sometimes I was going to say, sometimes we get into that antagonistic thing. It's like, oh, well, you've got to show me this, otherwise, blah, blah, blah. No, like, give them the opportunity, help them win, because they'll either do it or they won't, right? You're the arbiter of what the result, like the real value creation is. Sorry to add that in. I just wanted to make sure my tone wasn't mistaken.
Don't be sorry at all. I think that's a phenomenal point. It's just giving the opportunity for the vendor. And that's not usually the case, right? You're in so many of these competitive deals. And I think, on the buyer's seat, you're usually, okay, prove me, show me what you got. That's usually the mindset you go with, not always, well, I want my organization to win. And for my organization to win, maybe the vendor I choose also has to win, right? So, that's a great way of looking at it.
Love it.
All right.
All right. Was that a red flag or a green light?
Well, we turned the red flag into a green light now.
All right. That's it. We turned to green. All right.
We turned to green. You're winning.
Okay, let's go.
All right. Let's do the next one, right? So I'm going to give you another red flag that we've seen with a lot of, organizations, a lot of buying committees. And we are curious to hear how you would reposition or convert that into a green flag. And this one is more on the technical end, right? So yes, you have the AI hype, everyone's selling features, you want to sell the value, but the biggest issue is garbage in, garbage out. And so, a lot of companies, they focus on the quick wins so that they can scale AI. And that's not wrong. I mean, a lot of times if you want to drive adoption, you have to showcase those quick wins. But what ends up getting missed in these quick wins is you might be ignoring the integration complexity. You might be ignoring the data readiness, right? So when buyers, they ignore the heavy lift of integrations, the importance of data readiness. How do you reframe that conversation from, hey, it's less about quick wins now, but it's more about, sustainable outcomes. It's more about codifiable, repeatable processes.
I love that. And this goes back to Jackie mentioned the zombie POC, right? We're trying to avoid that. Again, so, the I, to be pedantic, right? The I in AI is intelligence. You're not just buying a product, right? You're buying this new intelligence layer. And yes, AI, it costs a lot to run those, right? They consume resources and so forth. One of the other things that AI needs is data. You will only extract max value out of an AI solution when it has access to the right data. That's what you need to know going into this. So to your point, Sneha, right, it's garbage in, garbage out. So how do we reframe it? You need to make this idea of integration and data readiness as a core part of the evaluation process, right? Not as an afterthought. So instead of just watching the demo or even giving the vendor some of those example records or use cases, you have to go a step further. What is the data that this AI is likely going to need? Or ask the vendor themselves, right? How do you train this? How do you integrate into other systems that have data across different data repositories and so forth? So when you approach it like that, you get a leg up. And so let's, for example, it's not just, hey, do you integrate with Salesforce? You want to ask more specific questions, right? So it's more like, hey, show me the last 3 integration projects you completed with customers that have a tech stack like ours, right? What did you do? What worked, what didn't work, what were the exact steps to make it right? Other questions like, what is your data schema? Can you share it? What format does our data need to be in for your AI to deliver the results that you showed us in the demo, right? Those best case results. So I think, those start to get more alignment with how do you think about not just solving the business problem, but also front end loading the knowledge, right? The understanding that this is going to integrate and with both systems, but also data as well. Sorry, that was probably a little bit long for turning it into a green flag.
Oh no, I think it's super important, right? Because it helps not only assess your own organization's data readiness, but also the vendors, and just asking the vendor, okay, show me what you've done for customers in a similar domain. And when you maybe if you have a repository of those, data integration needs, or hey, for customers with similar tech stack or with similar KPIs, these are must-have data points for us to show you that value. And then when you start talking about those data points, maybe the prospect realizes that, oh, we don't have any of these data points, right? And so although we're in a similar space, we can't really give the vendor much for them to drive true value optimization for us. So I think it's
Yep.
almost an eye opener for the organization, but also the vendor, which is really key in both of them succeeding.
So true. So much of traditional SaaS was about workflow or step-by-step kinds of processing, which required the user to sort of, manage that process. But with AI, you're buying a system, and you need to be supplying the AI with information in order for it to give a result. And so I think, one of the things I've learned over my career is, again, look at the vendor as a partner, not just a vendor. How can you create an environment, a technical and business environment, where you can both get a feel for what it will exactly be like when everything's in production? The more you put into making that work, the more it will work and deliver the promise.
Yeah, and we talked about this in detail last month in our last webinar about change management, right? It's slowing down at the beginning to do it right, to then speed up. And so it's kind of reframing this quick win to slow down so that you can move quickly down the road. I think the other thing I'm curious on your thoughts is, it's not like the data needs to be perfect, right? It's not like you need to slow down and get everything solved for. I think maybe a different way to kind of bring this to the audience is maybe tier your problems and let's put them into buckets. And bucket one, what needs to be ready for me to go live with this part, right? We don't need to boil the ocean. I can do this in phases. And so what's key for here? Let's solve that and let's get it running and start seeing some success. And then let's move on to the next. And so you're kind of segmenting the complexity from less to more, because some data might take a fair amount of time and some strong cross-functional support. Would you agree with that?
I 100% agree with that. In fact, I always, it's like think big, start small, scale fast, right? So create smaller chunks that you can, execute, launch, learn, iterate, launch again, right? Like that is the way to, I think, make progress. So yeah, I agree 100%.
Awesome. Yeah, because I think, some of those on the phone today might be like, oh my gosh, data readiness, that scares the living bejesus out of me.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to have it
Don't
all
worry,
right.
you don't need to
Yeah.
solve it all, just a little bit
Yeah.
at a time.
That's right. That's right.
All right, so we got the next one. You're in the green light.
Okay.
Next one up is really, I mean, I guess on the same thread of the change management, right? Underestimating the need for what needs to happen. And you already said this so well. The I in AI is intelligence, and that needs a lot of support. So I think, in the market today, we're all kind of thinking about AI as a simple software install. It's just what we're used to, right? And so, there's this sense of like falling are failing to plan for the unnecessary changes, the workflows, the roles. What does that mean for like AI, but also the human side? How does the human side, do they need to get upskilled to certain things in order to adopt and get the value from the tool? How are we constantly improving and innovating on this? It's just like those hitting AI costs. Um,
Mhm.
and it can be just like a total killer to you actually achieving the outcomes that you set out to measure, right?
Yep.
So how would you reframe this for somebody who's kind of thinking about that from an organizational change perspective?
Yeah, for sure. I want to give a little anecdote. Gosh, this is like 14 or 15 years ago. A friend of mine raced what are called spec Miata. It's a Mazda Miata with a certain specification. And I was in his garage and he was showing me how he was, no joke, he was putting a Corvette engine into the Mazda Miata. And I looked at it and I thought, okay, but the torque on that engine, the power of that engine, the cooling needs, right? And he's like, oh yeah, all of it needs to change, right? We need to change the suspension, we need to change the radiator, we need to change the brakes. I mean, the gearbox, all of it had to change, right? So this idea that you can just pop this intelligence into an organization and everything else can stay the same, I think is somewhat similar to this. So what do we do, right? How do we reframe it? And again, it's, I think this is the difference between when you buy a product or when you're, I'm going to use the big B word, or T word, or are you actually, doing a transformation? I don't know that you need to consider buying an AI product in the full scope of some management consulting, year-long business transformation initiative. But I think there are lessons we can take from that really, really help. So the first is you want to really talk with the vendor's customer success team and their pro services team, because they have now just become probably as important as the product teams that have developed the AI. And so I would say during, knowing that we're going to have to look at what are the roles, what are the organizational capabilities that we have, how do those shift, what are some of the processes we have, like all of those things have nothing to do with the code of the AI. It has to do with how do you create the environment to get the most value out of it. And so by asking the vendor about their customer services, customer success, professional services, you can get closer to that. For example, you can ask questions like, hey, show us your standard implementation plan. Where does like organizational change and like looking at processes fit in? When you have a standard implementation plan, what are the things that can go wrong? Can we assess where we are in terms of that? What roles are most likely impacted? Like, do you have training or other documentation? Do you have partners that do that? Can you show us how this worked with another customer that's a lot like us? Can you connect us with that customer that managed a transition similar to this? Now, remember, not every AI product is going to require, like I said, this organizational change. I don't want to, say the sky is falling, but I think, again, if you just spend a few moments thinking about the people that will work with and alongside the AI, you'll start to really understand how you'll get the most benefit out of it. And to do that, I would talk with the vendor and those services teams, like we mentioned. That's where I'd go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just this morning I was talking about, driving digital transformations. And I mean, transformations, they're not so much about technology, to your point, Peter. They're more about, processes. It's about shifting people's mindset, getting them to believe in the problem that you're solving for. And a lot of times, reasons why transformations they fail is it's because things are very complex, right? You need to
Mm-hmm.
really think of yourself as a chief simplification officer. And
That's good.
yeah, that's kind of what you need to think about yourself as. And transformations also fail because, we're usually trying to argue with why change management needs to happen, but the core really is, there's hesitation, there's resistance, and that hides in fear, right? So there is fear associated with exposing old ways of working. And so the bigger problem really with driving that digital transformation is you need to address the fear versus arguing on why change management should happen. And then
Yeah.
I feel
Yep.
that alone, like to your point, yes, it is a technology, it is a solution, but you need to think about it as a partnership. You need to ask them the questions on how are you going to implement this once I purchase it. I think meeting the buyer where they are, that's really key to driving the organizational change.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that that's how you framed all of these 3 red flags, right? We talked about the AI hype, we talked about integration data readiness, and then just the need for organizational change. And all 3 answers, the one theme that really calls out to me is you as the buyer are in the driver's seat. You are the expert, you know your business well. And so because of that, go to the vendor with exactly what you need to see the art of the possible versus this one size fits all. I think we all need that reminder sometimes of this is what I'm looking for. And I think that's a great way to find the right partner for this journey that you're about to embark on.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm even seeing organizations that are simply adopting chat AI, whether it's Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever. And as they get more sophisticated with it, all of a sudden it's starting to do a little bit of the work. And it's already starting to shift some of the way they process information or get their jobs done. And so I don't think there's any escaping it, right? Even the most straightforward AI is that chat session. And I'm seeing that even have organizational impact. So I don't think there's a way to escape it. So confronting it first and early, I think is the right way to go.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for doing that fun little red light, green light. Okay, so in the next session, my first question is, as a buyer, you always want to know what's fair, right? And most importantly, what's going to be future proof, right? Is my investment going to stand the test of time? And what might become expensive quickly, that seems fair, but once you get that run rate, who knows? So how do you begin that conversation? How would you tackle that?
For sure. So I go back to what I consider to be sort of like first principles around pricing. And my number one principle that I it's like my home base. As soon as I get asked a question, I go there first, I evaluate, and then I move from there. And that is the model, and by the way, this is the basis of fairness, I think, right? Is the model, the way the vendor is offering their product, is it one that is aligned with the value that you create, the value you receive, the business value that you enjoy, right, when that problem is solved? So in a way, when vendors, and by the way, you want the vendor to succeed. You want them to be around for a long time, right? You want them to be in this partnership with you. So they also need to prosper when you're getting more value out of the product as well. So I think that's what's fair, right? And we see this all around us. We've all entered into buying agreements where this is true, right? We both win when we make the transaction. So, anyway, I think, there's ways to see that, right? Like, so for example, we're all comfortable with, if you take like a productivity app, like what we're on now, right? Like Zoom, hey, it just seems fair that when we add a person to it, that we might get charged for that extra person because we have another person in our network that's able to access this tool. I think that's like the most basic example of that pricing model being aligned with value delivered. Okay, now the harder one is this idea of like future proof. Number one, I don't think that there's ever a way to future proof. Right now, we are in a time where things are changing pretty rapidly. However, you can rely on, I think, the way kind of economics work and the way kind of companies are very rational, right? They make rational decisions most of the time, fingers crossed. Okay, so the idea here with future proof is really about, can you scale up your use? Can you use the AI products way more without completely destroying your budget? And so in many cases, what you're going to see, we talked about this a little bit earlier, is what we call a hybrid model. This is where you've got some predictable base costs, like either a platform fee or a subscription fee. And then there's some variable component that scales with value. So as you're starting to use more of the product, your per unit cost of that variable, of that variable piece should decline. So what does that look like? It just means that, let's go back to the credit example, where maybe a vendor is offering you different tiers of offerings, and the large tier has a higher price point, but it includes a lot more credits, but the per credit price is much lower, right? So that's what you want to start to find, is some economy of scale on the variable piece, even though you're likely going to be paying more for more usage. Does that, I want to maybe just check in here for a moment. Does that kind of follow before I get to like the expensive one?
Yeah, I follow.
Yeah, I think this can get conflated sometimes, right? It's like, no, really, it is reasonable to pay more as you use it. However, the per unit cost should go a bit down. Like, that's me being a little, again, pedantic, but I just want to make sure that's kind of understood. So I think that's fair. I'm seeing this model proliferate. I talked about it at our own Scale GTM Summit back in April. This is what we're starting to see, is this hybrid approach gives a lot of flexibility for both the vendor and the buyer. Okay, so Jacquie, I think your last bit was what gets expensive very quickly, right? Okay. Let's go back to the earlier part of our conversation. Like, one of the first things I talked about was this concept of guardrails, right? The things that can help protect you. If you are looking at a product that is pure usage based without any guardrails, right? Like, so for example, you're paying for every single record enriched or every single API call, every record that's been processed, whatever it is, without any guardrails, this is where you're exposing yourself. It is very likely that down the road, you'll have some bill shock, right? Some unplanned sort of expense. The thing about AI, and I talked about this in my other session, was what's different from SaaS is that as you start to onboard more users and you've got some power users, you actually get a lot of economy of scale. But in AI, because of the very real costs associated with deploying and offering AI, a few power users can actually create that unexpected or unplanned spike, right? And it could literally blow the entire budget. So this is why we want those guardrails we talked about earlier, right? From day one, how do we have the usage caps? How do we create automated alerts? How do we maybe create buckets of credits if that's a thing for the vendor? Those are the ways to really rein in the expense.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, is it aligned to value? Can I get my guardrails? I think that's like a couple of the key takeaways here without jumping maybe to the end of this, but you're seeing a pattern repeat.
Yeah.
And I think your answer was so detailed. I had a few questions which your answer covered, right? I mean, my immediate next follow-up to you was going to be around, what do you think are some pricing structures that should raise alarms? But I think your answer gave a pretty, detailed explanation of how one needs to be thinking about pricing structures that do raise alarms. So, and I know we just have another 10, 12 minutes, and a lot of questions that Jacquie and I want to ask, but maybe what I can do is I'll jump to the two questions that I had, and then Jacquie, maybe we can wrap it up towards the end. One question as a follow-up, right? Outside of the guardrails, how should one think about, like, how do you introduce AI? In the pricing structure, right? We talked about what you're paying for. We talked about, like, usage-based, consumption-based, outcome-based models. We talked about guardrails, but how should vendors or even, buyers think about how AI is introduced, and if that's right? So maybe it's introduced as a standalone SKU. Maybe it's a feature flag on an existing SKU, or maybe just bundled as a value uplift, right? So what are some signals that guide that decision?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things about sort of, the marketing and pricing pages of a vendor's website. It is the purest expression of what they believe the market values, right? Like whatever's going on behind the four walls of the business, it all gets rendered somehow in the marketing and pricing page. And so here's some signals or clues you can really look at. All right, first, if you're looking at a vendor who's offering their AI solution as like this standalone SKU, I mean, this is kind of the most obvious case, right? It's a strong signal that they believe their AI solves this very large, major, distinct business problem, right? They've built an entire product around it. And so when that happens, part of what, so that's the signal. How do you think about it? Well, if they think that this is something that is solving this distinct business problem, well, I should be thinking about it as maybe more of a strategic investment, not just some software I'm bringing in, right? So that means maybe there are more stakeholders, which means I tap into more budget. Maybe it's operational expense, or maybe there's labor budget, right? Like if this can help reduce the demand for other kinds of work. So that's what I mean. Like you want to really look at the signaling and then flip it around and say, okay, how do I think about it if that's what they're thinking about it? And that's a good way to test, right? Whether or not you actually have the business problem that supports that kind of investment, right? So I think that's number one. So you mentioned feature flag, right? Or maybe like a paid add-on.
Yeah.
So I think this is what we're seeing across the board with many incumbent vendors, right? That now are adding AI capabilities. And so this is really probably the easiest and safest way if you want to start buying. It's this incremental purchase. And because it's a feature flag, it's enhancing something that your team likely is already using, right? That's kind of, I wouldn't say no brainer, but it just removes it from this like super strategic kind of conversation to, hey, let's get down to the value that's created when we add this AI in, okay? So I think here the budget request is probably a little bit smaller, maybe a little bit easier to approve. And so what you want to add is, is the price of the add-on justified by the incremental value? And you need to go back to all of the things we talked about earlier in this session about, scoping the business problem, understanding KPIs and value drivers, building that business case. Even for this, you should still go do that because it'll tell you, like, am I going to get out of it what I need? I think there was a third one.
Yeah, it was bundling it as a value uplift.
Right. Okay. So I would say, all right, so this is where they're just trying to add it to an existing offering and increase the price.
Yeah.
Okay. So to me, again, this is kind of like my engineer brain that also is the product marketing brain. It looks at that and it says, so here's a vendor that's sort of like taking their AI and tucking it in to the product without this very clear articulation of the value, and then they're just putting it in a higher tier price. It's a little bit lazy in my own personal experience, and it often means that there either wasn't enough time or maybe focus or effort on quantifying and articulating the value to the customer segments that it addresses, right? And so I would say, look, if there's this kind of bundle, talk about what the standalone price of that feature is, right? Just try to get down to the per unit value, if you would. Obviously you can't do that exactly, but just try to get a better sense of how does that AI do it standalone, and that's going to help you out. That's a more tricky one because you really have to go back to the vendor and ask them to defend the way they're making their offerings versus just reading what the vendor offers as a signal. Does that follow?
Yeah, that does.
Yeah.
I think it tracks into another emerging pattern that we're seeing, right? I think we've talked a lot about what the prospects, the buyers need to consider, but you have a good chunk of existing customers, right? And think about it. I mean, this could be like a segue from your feature flag or paid add-on conversation. So a lot of customers today, they are on, a usage, a consumption model. And
Mm-hmm.
now, because of the AI hype, everyone has incorporated AI as could be a standalone SKU, could be, an extra feature add-on. So the vendor has a new AI solution, and now you want to upsell that AI solution, right? So how should you think about managing that internally with budgeting, setting expectations? I think the struggle that I see a lot is because they're used to a certain model of pricing.
Yeah.
I find it difficult to all of a sudden change that to, oh, you're introducing AI component. Like, how are you charging us for this? Like, how do you justify it?
Yeah, I think, again, I think almost all of us are facing, like, in terms of reality. I talk about some nice to haves here and maybe some ideal scenarios. This is what everybody is faced with right now. So I love that we're coming to this. So I'll just go back and I'll say, I think very simply is in this world of AI, because of the rapid changing and dynamic nature, I would just look at all of these AI solutions as net new purchases, right? Now, like Jacquie was saying, you don't have to do it all at once, or think of it in terms of, getting it all done. You can start to look at what are we trying to solve and scope that out incrementally, right? And then you can adopt it, make it work, realize the value, and then get to the next piece. But, when you try to do this, you need to start again with the business case. Like this, I just go back to the same approach, right? Force that vendor to be able to articulate the quantifiable value, right? Like, what does it do for my business? Don't, like we talked about before, fall for it makes the experience better or it adds value, right? You want to know, how is it either reducing cost or creating value, right? And if it can't be defined by the numbers, I would say you're not going to be able to build a business case, right? So that is, I would say, step number one. And I would get that started very early in the whole frame. Now, the second is a little more, I would say, tricky. We mentioned this, not tricky, sorry. I think it's a little more considered is probably the right way to put it. And this goes back to, I think both you, Sneha, and Jacquie were talking about the ideas of proof of concept and not having them turn into zombie. I think this one, after the business case, is the most important step. You have to validate this. We talked about all of these ways we can help the vendor by giving them example data, example use cases. Well, now we have to do the reverse. We have to actually get this thing running in our environment. And so I think that we need to understand how we ask for what I would call the right kind of trial. And I think there's two types. So first, we all know proof of concept. This is, can the tech do what it says it can do? It's a technical validation. It's relatively short, a couple, 3 weeks. It's focused on the features, maybe basic integration. Do we get some of the benefit out of it, so on and so forth. That's the POC. I think we're all kind of aware of that. I think what we're seeing and what's what sometimes happens is we need this proof of value. This answers a very different question. This is more about, does the tech deliver the business outcome, right? It's not, did it work in our environment? It's, did it deliver the result? This can be much longer. It could be 6 weeks or longer. And it's going to require that partnership, right? Both to get the environment set up, but also to measure the ROI. And as a buyer, you need to decide what's appropriate, right? Maybe I can talk a little bit about maybe some ideas about how to choose.
Yeah, that'll be
Okay.
that'll be helpful. Like, when do you know a POC is sufficient? When do you choose to go with a POV? It's a fine line, right? It's very confusing to think, okay, maybe just a proof of concept will suffice, and then realizing, oh, I should have gone for value from the very beginning, versus, oh, I just wanted to test the concept. Why am I wasting 6 to 8 weeks on, an entire proof of value cycle? So we would love to understand like when to choose what.
Yeah, here's the way I think about it. And there's wiggle room inside of this, but if let's go back to some of our offerings, right? Like if the AI is this incremental feature, or even if it's a standalone thing that has a very definitive kind of role in what it's targeting. And really, you've evaluated the level of integration and kind of potential organizational change that might occur. If all of that is pretty minimal, and this is an important and the vendor has some relevant case studies, right, that are from companies that look like yours, I think POC is the way to go, right? You can get in there, you can evaluate the capabilities, make sure it works with your systems in your flow. You can validate any claims that have been made by the vendor. You can get a really good rough usage baseline. Now, on the other front, we talked about these more transformative solutions that you're implementing that are going to be more strategic, and they're going to have a little more complex integration and might have more significant changes to the workflow. This is where you might want to start thinking about a proof of value. And I would say, a little warning here, this is something where, many vendors may not just have this as a line item that they offer. You're going to want to approach the vendor again as a partner, right? Realizing that this is to mete out the benefits for both sides. And so this is especially true, I would say, if you're kind of an early adopter of a relatively new product, new category. This is even more important to kind of get that proof of value done. But the real one is it's moved from, is it an incremental feature? Is this a chat session? Is it doing a very specific job? Or is it something more transformative that's taking over entire workflows? That's where I think you need to make the decision.
Yeah, I love that.
All right. Okay, and my question was really around like usage versus outcome, but I do feel like you covered that enough throughout this webinar. Do you feel like we need to go through it in a little bit more detail in any way? I'll leave that up to you.
Well, okay. So I think maybe we spend a minute on it.
Yeah, I think it's just such a hot topic that maybe let's just explicitly call it out. I think a lot of people here are just eager. We talked about it, but I think since it's so hot, let's keep it as like a straight question. So let's just spend a little bit of time on usage versus outcome, right? I think there's different schools of thought. Walk us through it.
Yeah. So I'm smiling because when I was building my presentation for our summit, I've looked at hundreds and hundreds of pricing models. And they're actually they all fall down into there's three components that they all have, no matter what they're called. And one of the things I realized is that there is a distinct area for this outcome based. But here's the thing. I think all of us are familiar with usage-based, right? Even from classical traditional SaaS, we've all seen usage-based models. I mean, AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft's Azure, all of them are using those kinds of usage-based models. And we even see SaaS products that are infrastructure products that are on API called, think Twilio, for example, right? So this model, this usage-based model is proven. It's an open, transparent, it's a practical model. We all understand it. And so I think for that reason, it's sort of widely accepted. The issue, though, is that when we start introducing AI, there are some very real costs associated even with running a usage-based model. And that's why we go back to the discussion we had earlier, how the vendor does need to prosper to some degree as your usage and value extraction of the product increases, okay? So I think for most companies, we know this model and it's all good. Now, that said, we are seeing the beginnings of outcome-based pricing, okay? Now, in theory, this is what we actually all want down the road. This is where you only pay for the absolute business result. Now, we are seeing pioneering entrance into this space, right? We've seen Intercom's Fin product, Salesforce has launched a product, and I think Fins is around, charging per resolution. I'm telling you, I think longer term, it's a strong signal. But here's the issue. There are lots of practical challenges, right? Just very, very basic day-to-day issues that we see And we know they're playing out all the time. So here's what we can learn. First, like in order to truly offer this business outcome capability, you need to be able to define what the outcome is in a way that is transparent with both you as the buyer and the vendor. Okay, so for example, if Intercom defines a resolution as a conversation that Fin, which is their product, right, it closes without needing to escalate to a human agent, great, that's clear and it's audible, it's auditable. However, right, is it a true business outcome? Because the conversation closed, does it tell you that the customer was actually satisfied? Or what if the customer closed the conversation and started a new chat 5 minutes later? Or what if the issue was resolved from the customer's perspective, or excuse me, wasn't resolved from the customer's perspective, right? So in a way, I think what we're seeing is kind of the first volley of what I'll call like one layer of abstraction or a proxy for a business outcome, but not the actual outcome itself. I hope that's kind of understood. I know this gets into the weeds a little bit. But that's just from one side. Now, by the way, you as a customer, there's a substantial lift, right? There's a heavy lift for you to make it work. So for this to work with you and the vendor, you both need a shared trusted system for auditing and validating the results. This means you're going to need probably dedicated resources and bandwidth from your side. You have to ensure that you're tracking all the metrics accurately. It's a new operational process that a lot of teams maybe haven't been staffed or trained on or even structured to handle with, so that can cause friction. And so like for all of those reasons, I think that we're still in this experimentation phase. And so this true outcome-based pricing, which as AI gets more and more robust, I'm sure will happen sometime in the future. But today it requires a certain level of partnership and data integrity, data maturity, the right systems, trust that few companies are prepared to kind of deal with today. So I think, I think the number one takeaway here, Jackie, is I would say if the only option is an outcome-based pricing, take an inventory of those things I've just talked about, right? But I think the strength of your business case is going to be the decider. Because ultimately, if all those things are in place, right, all those practical challenges, and you've got a great business case, and you've been able to quantify the value created, and you've been able to prove it, then it could actually be a win. But that's a lot of ifs, and it's a lot of work to get that implemented. Sorry, that was probably a little longer than we wanted, but I'm very passionate about this thing. I think it is going to happen, but there's a long road there.
Yeah, no, and I think
you mentioned it, and Jackie, I'll leave it to you to close this out. But the whole structuring on Fin, right? I did go through their structuring model, and they have their claim to fame is the $1 million payback, right? So if they don't reach, I think maybe 60% resolution, then they'll give the customers $1 million. So I mean, that's I would say a lot of expectation that you need to. I don't know. It's interesting to think about a model like that. Maybe they've got their entire pricing structure, everything nailed down to be able to. It's guaranteed, right? So, but that guarantee is always tricky. So
yeah,
yeah. I'm glad we spent the time on this. I think it's so. It's not cut and dry, right? I think, my mind does go to outcome based, like, yeah, why not? I want to prove out my value. The CFO wants me to prove out my value. But to your point, the if and the ands, that's a pretty long list. So I think it's just being realistic around where we're at and even just where AI is at. So I appreciate you taking the time. All right.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Let's just close this out with, what do you think would be the key takeaways from today's session for folks to walk away with if they were to remember this entire hour, what would that be?
All right, let's do rule of threes here. And I'm just going to go back to some of the things that we've talked about a little bit earlier. So I think number one, is going to be on the business case. And I'm going to cheat here, and I'm going to say business case is really kind of, two things, right? It is, can you do all those things on your side as a buyer to really quantify, scope the problem, right? What is the job to be done? What is what are the KPIs and value drivers that are positively impacted or cost reduced? Make sure you've got very, very good scope on that. And so another way to put this is just start with your own P&L, right? Don't worry about tech. Worry about first, what is the thing we're trying to achieve? Okay, so that's it. Number one, business case, business case, business case. Invite the vendor in early, talk to them about the business case, show them the kinds of KPIs and value drivers you're trying to impact, show them the key results you're trying to achieve at the C-level and board level. That's number one. Okay, then I think number two is what I had a strong feeling around earlier, which is, hey, we are talking about acquiring something on a certain pricing model. And so I would say, number one, make sure you've got the right model that's aligned with value and the guardrails. Remember those guardrails, things like usage caps, things like alerts, and the ability maybe to buy in bulk, like credits and things like that, right? So that's number two. And then I think number three is be intentional and thoughtful about how you validate, right? Now that you've got the business case and you understand what problem you're solving, right? Is it something that warrants this POC, or is it something that warrants a POV? And remember, this isn't something you take lightly. It's not just on the vendor. You as a buyer, if you're going to enter into a POV, that's an entirely different and much enlarged set of resources and processes and commitments and everything else you're going to need to kind of get out of it what you want. So I would say number three, validate what validation model you want to use. Probably in that order also.
Perfect. All right, we covered a lot today,
Yeah,
a lot. So I appreciate you letting us pick your brain and get into some very technical and detailed conversations here. I think the audience appreciates it as well. This is extremely valuable. So thank you. Thank you again for joining us. Thanks for your time. Thanks for everybody in the audience for submitting your questions. I hope we went through most of them. And as always, we'll see you in a month.
Love it. Thank you, Jackie and Sneha and the whole Observe team. Really appreciate the opportunity to do this, and hope we get to chat more about this in the future.
Absolutely. I think this has been an eye-opening, mind-bending conversation. And I already have so many follow-up questions for you, Peter. I feel like we need another session.
Okay, I'm game.
All right.
We're on a usage-based model, so no problem.
Love it. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day or evening, depending on where you're at.
Bye. Thank you again.
Bye.